Hello and welcome to Smoke and Mirrors here on AI and Games, where I talk about the games I'm playing when I'm not making videos for the show, and then make YouTube videos about them. This month, let's talk about Ninja Theory's Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice. Just, damn man, this is a tight and engaging experience. So I started playing this game on PC a while back, but never finished it despite enjoying it. I got busy with something. So with it now on Xbox Game Pass, it was a solid reminder to me. Dude, go back and finish this game. So I started it again on Xbox One, then replayed the game on my PC version to record the footage of the episode. I have a lot of feelings about this game, as a player, a developer, an AI guy, but also as a person, and the journey this game takes. This is the first game in a long time where those closing chapters kept me glued to my seat. It's a tightly constructed and engaging puzzle combat game. It does run a little bit longer than I thought was necessary, and the combat runs out of novelty in the closing hour, but I still had a great time working my way through the story. Players take control of picked warrior Senua, who has travelled the seas to the mythical Norse land of Helheim in an effort to save the soul of her beloved Dillion. Throughout your travels to the Tower of Hela, you face off against not just a variety of undead warriors, but boss battles inspired from Norse and Danish folklore such as Surt, Valravn and Garm, before facing off against Hela herself in a battle for both Dillion's soul and yours. It's a really unique and dark fantasy world that's presented, and is one of the most refreshingly unique aesthetics I've seen in games for a long time. But the thing that drove me to this was that your character Senua suffers from a form of psychosis. Senua's mental health is fragile, given she frequently has auditory hallucinations.
He's there, you know. There's no doubt about it. The source of the darkness is in Helheim.
However, as we find out throughout the story, it's laced with a number of symptoms driven by emotional abuse throughout her life. It is powerful stuff, and really adds a lot of weight and depth to what's happening in the latter segments of the game as her life and her suffering comes into focus. This is tied into the narrative and presented in such a refreshing and richly delivered manner, not just graphically, but in terms of audio and overall mood and tone. It leaves you wondering just how much of what we're experiencing is real, how much of this is fantasy or reality. Is this even a dark fantasy tale or a nightmare brought on by Senua's afflictions? It leaves you to decide that yourself in many respects, and doesn't really focus on this aspect of the story, but it left me with real food for thought. But throughout the game, Senua's mental state is reflected in what we see, what we hear, and how we play. The auditory hallucinations result in a variety of voices, many reflecting aspects of Senua's personality, but also the guilt and anguish she feels about so much of her life through binaural audio. The voices seldom stop, and the quality of this audio recording alongside the number of unique takes of each voice and dialogue is fantastic. It never feels like it's repeating the same line of dialogue for the sake of it. It all feels carefully mediated and tailored, with the dialogue feeling fresh and relevant throughout. It's an amazing game to play in a surround sound environment or with headphones, and it sets the atmosphere of the game so well in that it feels so unsettling and outright terrifying at times. Meanwhile, many of the visual elements are inspired by real-world afflictions of psychosis to the point it's a mechanic, identifying unique patterns in the world to open doors, as well as optical illusions and other strange visual occurrences that keep you guessing. Some of this is used to full effect, with the optical illusions forcing the player to navigate what are essentially hidden mazes in certain segments of the game, meaning you have to revisit environments from fresh perspectives and see things you never saw before. As a developer myself, I need to know how that process works. It's one of the few things in the game that kind of pulled me out of the experience, but in a good way, as I just stopped playing through the story just to explore these puzzles and figure out how the hell they even implemented it. I'll refrain from spoiling anything for anyone, though if you want to get into a deeper discussion, go and hit that comment section, but I just loved the experience, and even more so on second full playthrough on PC. My only gripe is I found the pacing a little off at times. Sometimes puzzle sequences were a little too long or were a little too confusing, and it pulled me out of the game as I tried to figure out what was expected of me. But hey, you know, minor quibbles and all that. Now, as mentioned in between the puzzles is the combat, where you're fighting off undead warriors trapped in hell. The combat is pretty simple mechanically, but it's quite satisfying, and it has a number of small tweaks and flourishes that work well towards it. It adheres largely to the Batman Arkham model, whereby you have a light attack, strong attack, dodge, and a block that, when timed perfectly, is a parry. The actual AI is pretty straightforward. They gather around and take turns to attack. Very much an Arkham or Assassin's Creed style of waiting to attack, but there's sufficient diversity between the enemies and it gradually rolls out new archetypes. First with standard warriors, then they start getting shields, hammers, axes and all sorts. Plus some that even become difficult to hit until you trigger counters. It adds flavour to the combat over time, although I do feel like it struggles in the back half of the game as it gets a tiny bit repetitive and could benefit from some additional mechanics for the player to have a bit more variety. Outside of that though, the great thing about the combat is that it has a lot of weight to it. Actions have momentum and require timing to deliver, and when it connects, it makes it all the more satisfying. It requires you to be on your toes, to be moving quickly, reacting to changes in the combat as new enemies appear from the darkness, and striking when that opening appears. There is some issues with the camera orientation, being that when you're in the midst of combat, enemies appear behind you and can sucker punch you. The game doesn't give any clear visual indicator that an enemy is going to attack beyond the animations, and that's largely I feel to keep with the presentation format they've aspired to. It actively avoids being as video gamey as possible, with the exception of the element that highlights that you've charged up your slow-mo attack ability. But in defense of the occasionally awkward camera, one of the things that works well in its favour is Senua's psychosis. The voices in her head commentate on the combat, when you've got the momentum, when you're close to death and need to get up, but critically, they warn you of incoming attacks if you're listening to them. It adds this kind of meta layer to the combat that enriches the overall experience. All of this combined with the visuals, which once again are just stunning, and the epic score results in some pretty fantastic set pieces. The fight sequence in the sea of corpses about 3/4 of the way through the game was the highlight moment for me. That whole fight was a fantastic experience. The latter fights get a little hairy at times, but overall I found it really satisfying. Oh, just before I begin to wrap this up, the one thing I didn't really have anything to comment on is the permadeath aspect of the game. I've played through the game twice, and sure I got knocked down and died a couple of times, but never reached the point of permadeath and being forced to restart it, so I don't have any real comment on that, though I would be interested to hear from any of you if you had to deal with that and what that experience is like. Alrighty, I'm going to wrap up this episode of Smoke and Mirrors, and I'm just happy that I finally got around to finishing this game. I remember being blown away by it when it came out, only to then drop the ball and not continue it due to some sort of interruption. Genuinely can't remember what it was. But hey, I got to come back and gush about how much I enjoyed it with all you lovely people. Did you enjoy this game as much as I did, or did it just kind of bum you out? Get on over to the comments, let's hear from you. I'll be back next month and I'm digging out another old school shooter that I never got around to playing fully. Star Wars Republic Commando. It's got quite the cult following, and a lot of you actually refer to it in the comments in the series over the years, so I'm keen to finally figure out why everyone digs it so much. Thanks again for watching, I'll be back soon, take care.